That doesn't mean it doesn't have huge and far-ranging implications for all of us, really, economic, social, and so on. I've got a huge list of questions here that lots and lots of people have submitted beforehand, and that we're going to try and get through as many of as we possibly can. I will, without further ado, introduce the panel. On my far left is Chuka Umunna, who's the Labour MP for Streatham and the former Shadow Business Secretary. To my immediate left is Ben Howlett, who is the Conservative MP for Bath. To my immediate right is Liz Bilney, who's a businesswoman and the CEO of Leave.EU, campaigning for Brexit. And on my far right is Patrick Nicholls, who was the Conservative MP for Teignbridge from 1983 to 2001, served as a minister in the Thatcher government. I should have said to my left is the Remain camp, and to my right is the Leave camp. Hopefully that became clear as we worked our way along the second. So I'm going to ask each of the panellists to give us just a kind of 2-minute message, really, on why they think we should remain or leave. But I thought we might take a quick straw poll to start with on how you feel at the moment about leaving or remaining, or whether you're undecided. So at the start of this evening's proceedings, who thinks that Britain should remain in the EU? Oh, that's pretty strong. All right, you've got a tough task against you, but you know. And who thinks we should leave? Okay, fair showing. And undecided? Oh, quite a few of those. Okay, it's all to play for. It's all to play for. Excellent. All right, so if you could all, we're going to start with a fairly strict 2 minutes, guys. Would be great, and I think I'll work my way along if that's all right. So, Chuka, do you want to start?
In 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Yeah, I'm going to look at my watch. Yeah.
Well, look, I'm not going to go into all the detail. We'll get through that during the debate. But for me, this is about whether you have a big or a small vision or view of our country. I do not buy the view that the UK gets trampled over whenever it wants to get things done in the European Union. The fact is, the overwhelming majority of times when there are votes on the European Council, we are leading the way and we are on the majority side. The question is, really, how do we exercise power in a completely different era in a way that delivers better and tangible outcomes for people at home and fairer and better outcomes for the world? And I think the best way that we do that is by working with other countries that have similar values to us, the same respect for human rights, and have to make their way when we're competing with the likes of India, biggest democracy in the world with its 1.2 billion people, and China with its 1.3 billion people. And I'll just leave you with this anecdote. When I led a trade delegation to China, to Beijing in 2013, and visited the International Department of the Communist Party, as you do, they said to me, we do not understand, why do some people in your country want to leave the European Union? Because when you negotiate with us, with all our people, you're currently sitting on one side of the table with 500 million people negotiating with our 1.3 billion people. Why do you want to take your chair and sit in the corner on your own? And I said, you know what? Come and help us make the case if we have a referendum in the UK. So that is why you should stay in.
Excellent. Do you know what? I think rather than where
2 minutes. Okay, well, I have no killer facts for you. I don't think you can prove the argument in or out by bandying statistics. I don't think it's a question of bringing on experts. You know, there's so many experts on one side, so many experts on the other. That doesn't work. In the end, all this is about a question. And it's a question which everyone in this room is equally qualified to have a view upon. And the question is this: who rules? Should it be Westminster or should it be Brussels? Because at the moment, in a general election, supposed to work this way anyway, the British people are a majority in their own country. In other words, at a general election, you get the government you voted for. You may live to regret it. But even so, at the next election after that, you get the chance to get rid of it. Then when you go to Europe, you're not a question there where you're a permanent majority in your own country. You are one amongst 28 in a foreign country. And what it means is this: that if you want to control who comes into your country, if you don't want your laws struck down for being at variance with European law, if you want to be able to strike up your own trade deals which suit you and not just another bloc, if you want to be able to decide whether you can fish in your own waters, whether you can pass your own tax laws, all of those decisions will be made increasingly in Europe. And in Europe, we are in a minority of one. And I hear it said so often, but think of our influence. Yes, well, we are consulted because so we have to be. But you only have to see the way in which the Prime Minister was treated in his negotiations to realise they will do it their way and we will do it ours. You see, in the end, in this room, we're mixed generations of people who are even older than I am and a lot of people considerably younger. And, you know, virtue within living memory. British people have been prepared to fight and sometimes die because they thought there was something unique about Britain that they wanted to preserve. Yes, they wanted to be in friendship and amity with their neighbours, but in the end, they wanted to control their own destiny. Am I really supposed to say to my children and my grandchildren, well, they were heroes, but you're not? A secondary who basically becomes second or even third rate. In the end, the decisions which affect your lives will not be up to your members of parliament. It's going to be decided by Europeans. That, for me, is not a vision that I want to pass on to my descendants.
Ben Howlett.
Thank you. For me, it was a long-term sort of thought in my head about heart versus head. In that my heart is saying, in one instance, you know, the European Union isn't perfect, and I get the fact that it is in many ways needing fundamental reform, but given my own circumstances in 2008 when I got my first job and all the economic insecurity that ended up facing me in my first few years in my career, am I really seriously going to go to all those young people who are in exactly the same boat as me, aged 21, going out and finding their first job and saying to them, we don't know what it's going to look like after we possibly leave. We don't know the impact it's going to have in terms of your jobs, your security and all the rest. Am I going to say to all those young people that I'm going to effectively give you exactly what hardship I ended up having to go through in my first few years, and seriously say we're going to end up leaving the European Union? So, whilst I think there needs to be fundamental reform, I really don't want to end up levelling on to every single young person in this country a very serious set of insecurities, and we don't know the answers, to which we don't know the answers. And the ultimate answer for me is that we've got to remain inside the European Union because ultimately, as Chuka has just said, our long-term future is changing. Our long-term future is going to be as a part of a global world, and our seat is much better at the European Union level, talking about things like steel, like jobs, like climate change, like international security, than it would be for us to be just a small nation of 60 million people in a world of billions. So it took a long time to come to the decision which I did do, which was ultimately that I think we're better off inside than outside. And just leave you with a little bit of an anecdote. I was over at the United Nations a couple of weeks ago and speaking to the head of the CIA out there, and they were saying, well, hold on, why on earth would you ignore all the countries which are saying that you should end up staying inside the European Union, such as Canada, like the United States, like pretty much every European nation, Australia, New Zealand, and all the rest, and listen to the likes of Russia and some politicians in Iran saying that, you know what, we think you should end up leaving the European Union. To be frank, I don't really trust Russia and the politicians in Iran to think about our future in the best light. So, based on that,
I'm going to stay Chinese, evidently, but so we couldn't have invited them, isn't it? Liz Bilney from Leave.EU.
As a businesswoman, I tend to base my decisions on logic. What will make us financially better off and more efficient? On a personal note, as a mother, I've also considered security and the future prospects for my children. In terms of the EU, I believe that in terms of trade, finance and taking control of our laws, we'd be better off outside the EU. When looking at finance, we're the 5th largest economy in the world. We were right not to join the euro, and the renegotiations sought to protect us from further integration. However, these renegotiations were subject to approval in European Parliament and are therefore not worth the paper they're written on. Why be part of a club where you have caveats and protection? By coming out of the EU, we would save £300 million per week, which will go a long way to paying off our national debts. In terms of trade, we buy more from the EU than we sell, so the future trade deals are in our hands. If we vote to come out, we will still be able to buy German cars, French wine and cheese in our supermarkets. These deals will not collapse because we are buying more from them, and the EU will still want to sell. Our trade deals are growing at a faster rate outside the EU than inside, particularly with less developed countries, where we should be looking to help support so they in turn become less dependent on us. A good example of this is rebuilding our relationships with the Commonwealth. In terms of sovereignty, by being in control of our laws, we'll be able to put in place appropriate laws and policies that are suitable for our own country's geographic, economic and social demographic makeup. For example, we could introduce suitable migration, fishing and business regulations that would free us up from the EU current shackles and the burdens. EU law resides over UK law. Is it right that the European Commission is non-elected and cannot be disbanded?
The immigration question, which is a very tough one. Can the influx of immigration continue at its present rate? I'm going to throw that to you guys first, I think.
Businesses in the west of England, particularly in the southwest, are absolutely itching to get their hands on new engineers, new workers. In Bath, I've got 1.8% unemployment at the moment, and the demand that is coming into those businesses cannot be met at the moment because of the fact that we don't have enough workers. We have to get a clear economic argument out there for why immigration is actually a good thing. This sort of Daily Mail, and by the way, I'm a Guardian reader, by the way. First time we'll ever hear a Conservative say Guardian reader. The Daily Mail, Daily Express scaremongering on the front page every time, say, oh, more radical Islam sort of coming into the UK and destroying our communities and all the rest. It's absolute nonsense. And we need to be making that economic case very clear that our businesses are desperate for new workers. Now, to do what Germany did, which was to have an influx of 800,000 workers within the space of a couple of months, I think was the wrong way of doing it. It does cause friction with your local communities, but we have to make sure that we are delivering a clear argument around immigration that isn't wrapped up in this sort of scaremongering type, all immigration is wrong. Most immigration is actually incredibly good, incredibly valuable, and is also keeping our businesses open.
If I could just
absolutely.
If I could just reply to that, target immigration figures are in the tens of thousands, and predicted immigration figures for this year and next year alone are over 200,000. So we need mechanisms to help control that. We do want to welcome people from all over the world, and we do recognise that there are jobs that need to be filled. But if we have the opportunity to put in place our own systems to be able to control migration, we can welcome people from all over the world. We can offer out jobs, and the best people will get those jobs, and we will invite skilled workers into the country.
So would you like to see net migration being considerably lower, or
I think the migration figures just need to match the jobs that are available, and we need to get that balance.
Just a minute. I mean, look, I don't think there's anything wrong, and I have some concerns myself about the way in which free movement and immigration operates in our country, and I'm the son of an immigrant. What am I concerned about? I'm concerned about our workers being undercut, but that is an argument for proper enforcement of the national minimum wage. I'm concerned that people contribute into our system before they take out of our social security system, which is why with the renegotiation, people being here for some time and contributing in before they take out was a significant achievement. But I also think that we spend far too much time focusing on the numbers and not enough time on how we actually help people to integrate into our society. The debate on immigration in this country is a disgrace and is a disservice to the values that we hold dear as Britain. And if we want to detoxify this debate, we've got to make sure we are better, not only in just having diverse communities, which we're very proud of, but making sure that within our diverse communities, we don't have people living parallel lives and that they understand each other. So we need to be providing much more support to people who come here, for example, with learning English. If you don't speak the language, then it's very hard to integrate. But what I absolutely reject is this notion that somehow all of the problems of this country are down to Eastern European immigrants who are taking your job, taking your hospital bed and the rest. The reason that we have these problems is because domestic governments of different political persuasions have failed to deal with these problems, have failed to properly invest in the NHS, have failed to build enough houses in this country, and we should not be blaming all of these problems on immigrants, as you saw Nigel Farage do during the general election campaign. You remember getting stuck in a traffic jam on the way to one of his conferences? Oh, it's too much immigration. We should have no truck with that at all as a British nation that holds decent, fair values.
I think I can agree with just about everything Chuka Umunna said, and frankly what fair-minded, decent person couldn't. But let's just go back to the question of the moment. I think, and I'll be corrected if I'm wrong, I think the question is, can we go on taking people at the rate in which we are? And the only honest answer to that is no. And the problem that we have at the moment is that we simply cannot control the influx from the European Union. Now, it's one thing to say that we treat people properly when they get here, no doubt about that. And what's happening in Turkey at the moment, there's a tragedy about to unfold there. But the idea that because of our decent liberal sentiments, we just allow everybody to come, that simply does not work. You know, it may sound compassionate, but in the end it isn't. And it may be that, you know, Chuka's experience the last 5 years has been different since I left Parliament. But I have seen places where the National Health Service really is under strain because of the numbers coming in. And the fact of it is that because of the free movement of labour, that is what happens in Europe. So I think, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, I'll get rid of them pretty quickly if I do, but I think even Chuka would say that there has to be some degree of control. And the problem is, we do not have that control at the moment, and as a result of that, it is the people at the very lowest level of the heap who are going to suffer the most. So that is the reason why people like me, it's a question going on Nigel Farage, it's why we say we have to have some mechanism for control, and for as long as we are in the European Union, a significant ability to exercise that control simply isn't there.
I'll tell you what Chuka would say. Chuka would say the reason that the NHS is under strain because it has been subject to a top-down reorganisation that we were promised would not happen. And let us not forget, when you say dear oh dear, that is a fact. And let us not forget, actually, that the NHS is massively reliant on immigrants. We have 50,000 clinicians and nurses helping to run our NHS. So let's not forget that. And this
Why are we
idea,
discriminating between EU and non-EU countries? I think we should welcome people from all over the world
Because-
and get the best people, the right skilled people for the jobs.
Because, I'll answer that question. Because with the free movement, we get access and all the benefits that come with part of the single market. With other countries, say Commonwealth countries, we don't have the benefit of the trading arrangements that we have with other EU members.
So you want unlimited immigration? That's what you want, unlimited immigration in this country.
Well,
let's just clarify this, Chuka. Is that what you want?
If you let me finish my sentence.
No, just if you do answer the question on the way.
What I was going to say, if you let me finish my sentence and answer your question, is this notion that somehow we have no control over our borders or immigration from the EU. This notion that we have no control is absolute nonsense. You know, when you arrive at Gatwick or Heathrow or whatever airport it is, do you just get off your plane and go and pick up your bags and get out of the terminal?
You show an EU passport and then you come.
You show your passport, you go through a passport control because we are not part of the Schengen passport-free area.
Just means you show your passport. That's all it means.
That is a fact. And there is also, if you want to take it one step further and people actually come in, you are also subject to a habitual residency test before you can draw on any of our public services or benefits.
But both of you, I think, I've said that you're pretty happy with current levels of net migration. It's about whether we integrate people properly, whether we get them into the workforce properly, whether we, yes, is that?
Ultimately, in terms of the point that's just been made, we're talking about the reasons why we cannot cope because the infrastructure hasn't been put in place in order for that to cope. We're getting to the gist of it. And actually, the European Union does give us, how much was it, £729 million in regeneration money. Other questions. and other subjects. I hope.
Well, one of the things that Chuck and I learned at law school, one of the questions you would be asked is there anything which a sovereign parliament cannot do? And the answer always was, Parliament can't bind its successors. In other words, the idea behind that was that you cannot say to a future generation, sorry, this law's been passed, you're not entitled to change it. And what Edward Heath and his cronies did all those years ago was to actually hand the right of the British people to take a view on what they want, handed it over to somebody else. Now, in my opinion, they didn't have the right to do that. Effectively, what they were doing as politicians was trying to bind successor parliaments, and that is completely out in the British constitutional system. So I actually agree with what was said a moment or two ago. When this raises its head again will depend to an extent on the size of the majority to stay in if that is what happens. But who knows what will happen with Europe? It is a very uncertain place. And I can certainly see a situation where future generations will turn and say, hang on a second, who asked me how I felt about this? I don't like this. This is my country. What will subsequent generations learn in law school? That somehow their rights were transgressed forever by previous politicians? So no, this one won't ever go away forever, but the size of the majority would make a big difference as to when it resurrects itself again. And I'll tell you, I know Bill Cash. I've known him longer than anybody on this platform. I tell you, he's Frankenstein. You could drive a stake through his heart, and somebody like him, probably son of Bill, will come back.
It's disturbing, anyone got a stake?
I think that's...
The mental images there is just...
I don't think you'll ever shut up the Eurosceptics, particularly in the Conservative Party, whatever the result is. But I agree with Patrick. I mean, Parliament cannot bind its successors. But I do just want to say something about this notion of sovereignty.
That's funny, because I was just about to go on to that.
Oh, okay.
No, it's all right. What does sovereignty mean to you in 2016? I feel you were going there already, weren't you? Were you?
Well,
what does sovereignty mean to you?
I can answer that question. But what I was going to invite people just to reflect on, and this notion that we don't control our own affairs, I think is garbage. I was in the last Parliament, as Patrick has mentioned, and we passed 121 Acts of Parliament, and just 4 of those were passed to exclusively implement European legislation. Around 13% of our laws, according to the House of Commons Library, which has been mentioned, have been passed to implement European legislation. But if you just look at the whole gamut of things that government has done here that you like, or maybe you don't like, and I look at all the things that I was campaigning against in the last Parliament, whether it was the bedroom tax, the trebling of tuition fees, the top-down reorganisation of the NHS that I talked about, I could go on. The European Union had absolutely nothing to do with that whatsoever. So this notion that, well, I mean, I'm being heckled from the front here, TTIP hasn't actually been finalised or published yet. So we can come to that once it's been produced. But if you actually look at what government has done over the last 4 or 5 years and the big things that have provoked public discussion, it has been domestic laws that have provoked that discussion. And secondly, the thing that I get so bemused by is that many of these people talk about sovereignty. Patrick started off by saying who rules and who chooses the government. They have so much to say about democratic issues in the European Union. Absolutely nothing to say about the democratic deficit in our own country, where we have an electoral that is elected a government with the support of less than 25% of the electorate. They have nothing to say about that. In fact, the very people bang on about democracy in Europe are the people who defended us having an unelected, aristocratic House of Lords. So there's a massive double standard here, a massive double standard.
I may have misunderstood the figure here, and Chuka, of course, will correct me if I'm wrong. But I think he said that it was a bit of a fiction that a lot of our legislation was dominated by Europe. I think he actually used the figure of 15%. Well, I have a press release here from a bright and ambitious young Labour politician in October 25th, 2001. Where Chuka said this: on regulation, the Tory-led government has overpromised and underdelivered. For example, its one-in, one-out rule does not apply to European legislation, which accounts for around half of all new regulation. Now, the way he can get the figure down today to 15%, because A, he didn't know I had this, okay, that's the first obvious one. But the way you get it down is by looking at on primary legislation, it's about 13%. But according to the House of Commons Library, and three of us on this platform regard the House of Commons as the Holy Grail. You cannot contradict it. Say, on average, about 60% of our legislation, when you run together primary and secondary, actually comes from Europe. Now, let's have another debate. Let's all come back here again. Hey, let's stay on much later and talk about the way we do things internally here and whether any MP has got a right to sit on this platform if he doesn't have 50% of the votes cast in his own parliamentary election. That would be an interesting debate. But that's not where we are today. What we're talking about is not the balance amongst ourselves. Great subject, another occasion. We're talking about the balance between ourselves and Europe. And at the moment, for all its manifest imperfections, we do actually control it ourselves, and the question is of how much of that will we hand to Europe.
On that, let me answer that. That figure in that press release put out in my name was wrong. And that's
of
because
course it is.
Well,
it is wrong. The House of Commons Library says 60%, so of course it was wrong.
No, the House of
more than the figure you gave today.
The House of Commons Library says 13%.
It doesn't. It says 60 if you combine primary and secondary.
It says 13%. And
Chuka, it says 60.
It says 13%.
At the end of the day, I think law prevails over UK law, so they have the trump card over us, and that's
No. Look, the very fact that we're having this referendum is an illustration that Parliament is sovereign.
It's got some.
The very fact that we're having the referendum is an illustration that Parliament is sovereign, and we learned that at law school. But in terms of the press release, it should have said 15% and not 50%. But the actual figure is 13%. That is a fact.
You can all go online later on when you go home and look at what the House of Commons Library figures tell you.
Check it.
So we've got a very, very short amount of time, only a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to, rather than sort of bandying numbers about which we've done quite a bit of, there's just a little question here which is about young voters. And just quickly, can you each give us a reason why young voters should turn out and take this seriously? Because there's a suggestion, isn't there, that older voters, well, in general, older voters are more likely to turn out. Why should younger voters turn out on June 23rd? And then we'll sadly have to wind up. Patrick, should we start with you? Should we come along this way?
Because for at least a generation, it will settle the nature of the country in which they're going to work, be educated, and bring up their children. It will settle that for a generation. And I think one of the saddest things is that when you hear people saying, oh, it's not got much to do with me. I used to have this as an MP the whole time. MPs don't matter, all that stuff. It matters desperately that they should decide for themselves what sort of a country they want and go out and vote for it, whether it's on my side of the argument or Chuka Umunna's. It's vital. Whether it will happen or not, pass.
Liz, I absolutely agree. This is a people issue. This, for me, isn't even a political issue. Every single person needs to get out and make their vote heard. It's really important, especially for the future generation, that they're going to have to live with this decision. Interestingly, the older generation, they are more on the coming outside, and that's because they've seen what's happened. They've seen how the EU has evolved from what we joined to what it is today, and the younger generation will learn from that, and they will see, if we do stay in further, how it evolves. And I hope that they won't regret the decisions that the older generation seems to regret. So this is a one-off opportunity, and it doesn't come round every year. So we all need to get out and vote.
As a 29-year-old MP and as someone who saw
2008... Quite a young person.
kind of self-professed young person. I suppose I've become a bit of an old age pensioner, as you were saying, I'm very true to this job. But as a young person in inverted commas myself, seeing the economic instability that ended up happening as a result of the Great Recession in 2008, I really cannot go to young people and say, you're going to end up having this same environment levelled upon you with all the risks that could be put upon you if we end up leaving the European Union. And I have a plea to the older people in the audience right now. Go away and have a phone call or speak to your children or your grandchildren and ask them what they think, because you'll be surprised in the outcome. You will see that they will say, actually, for goodness sake, do it for us, keep ourselves inside the European Union, because it's our generation and it's going to be my children's generation that's probably going to be most affected out of this. So please, please pick up the phone and speak to your children in making up that mind, making that decision.
They're not convinced by listening to you, but Chuka,
Well, the last word.
the last word.
I'd say two reasons. First, if we vote to leave, there is undoubtedly going to be severe turbulence and an economic shock. The IMF are the latest people who said that before we all walked into this room. And we know that of all the economic factors, the area which gets hit first and hardest is the area of youth unemployment. But actually, secondly, there's a bigger thing I want to mention, which we cannot leave this room without talking about, which is I don't want to see what happened to the older generations inflicted on future generations. People forget that in the 70 years before the European Union came into existence, France and Germany went to war no less than 3 times, and there was a huge amount of bloodshed. There is a reason the Nobel Committee awarded the European Union the Nobel Peace Prize in 2012. And that is because since the European Union has been in situ, the idea of 2 big nations like Germany and France going to war is utterly unthinkable. Now, I wouldn't deny the role that NATO has played in that, but I think the interconnectedness and the fact that we see each other not as enemies, fighting against each other, trampling all over each other, but as partners and friends trying to make our way in a very complex world is something that we shouldn't take for granted, something that we should celebrate and remember when we go to the ballot box on the 23rd.
Chairman, that should
We're over time, so...
The threat to peace since 1945 has not been from a democratic Germany, it was actually from the Soviet Union, and it was the NATO, the American nuclear umbrella which protected it, had absolutely nothing to do with the idea that 2 democracies, Germany and Britain, might go to war. Democracies don't go to war. Germany wasn't a democracy in 1931.
We've reached the end, we've gone over our time, we'll be in terrible trouble.